It's Monday here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We got to talk about the defense. Something I saw in the NFL divisional round of the playoffs that reminded me about something I've been talking about that the Steelers needed to do more this season. We'll talk about what that is, how that can change a lot of things in 2025, and a lot more here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play just $5. All right, Steelers fans, welcome back to the week. It was a crazy weekend in the playoffs. Also, happy Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Always a special day to remember one of our great American heroes. But let's talk about these Steelers and this defense. Now, one thing that I talked about leading into the Steelers game against the Ravens that they needed to do was I thought that they needed to blitz Lamar Jackson a lot. I thought they needed to blitz him at a higher rate. When I showed how when they blitzed more against him in the first game versus the second game, when they won versus when they lost early in the regular season, they had more success. They were able to limit him more, and they were able to get him under pressure and force him to kind of play the style of ball that the Steelers want him to play. The second game, they didn't do that. Playoff game, they did that a little bit, but nowhere near enough. And when they did blitz, they didn't get home. Anyways, he had a terrific game. But I saw something that was interesting from Robert Mays, who hosts the Athletic Football podcast. He tweeted out around, I think it was like around halftime or shortly after halftime of the Ravens-Bills game, where he said, per Next Gen Stats, the Bills blitzed on 46.7% of their dropbacks in the first half. It's the highest percentage of the season in a first half for them. They only had 3 other games where they blitzed on at least 1/3 of their dropbacks. The lesson that I get from that, and I haven't seen the full stats there, and I haven't had time to comb through all their numbers from currently, and I'll always take some tabulation. But the bottom line was, I looked at that game when I was watching Bills-Ravens, and I saw a lot of things that the Steelers had done to the Ravens in key games when they beaten the Ravens, bringing heat on Lamar, forcing him to have to win with his receivers, which is something we talked about all week leading into that game. You got Rashad Bateman, put Joey Porter Jr. on him, Zay Flowers is out, force Lamar Jackson to have to win, throwing into tight man press coverage while you're blitzing, while you're throwing everything at the line to stop Derrick Henry and to stop Lamar Jackson from using his legs. I think the Bills did that plan. Of course, they also have Josh Allen. That always helps too, and they were able to get a big win. And we'll talk more about that win later. But this dives into what I think is part of the reason why the Steelers need to figure out a different way of going about on defense. And it also dives into the whole defensive coordinator discussion as far as where the Steelers are. Now, the Steelers haven't made any moves at defensive, at coaching wise that are public, at least right now. We'll see if that changes later today, this week, whenever. I think we're supposed to hear from Art Rooney at some point, either this week or next. We'll see when that happens. But Teryl Austin being the defensive coordinator for the last 3 years, as I've said, some people out there will say, well, it doesn't matter who's defensive coordinator. Mike Tomlin's the coach. He calls the defense. He just runs the defense. As I've said, that's not 1,000% true. That's not the whole case there. Yes, Mike Tomlin does. This is his defense. He does put a lot into it. But the defensive coordinators do have some autonomy. As I've pointed out, when you look at the schematics and you look at how the defenses have played in different years, you can see major schematic differences and stylistic differences from Keith Butler to Teryl Austin, even in just the past 6 years, because you had the last 3 years of Teryl Austin, and the 3 years before that were Keith Butler. Now, let's take a sec here, and I want to show you some numbers here about what we're talking about here. And we're talking about the blitzing and the Steelers. When Keith Butler was at his best, when he was the defensive coordinator for the Steelers defense was bringing heat, and they were a top 5 unit. And I want to show you the 2 best years, 2019 and 2020. Here's a chart that I threw together when I was looking back at here. If you go back to the last 6 seasons, 2024 back to 2019. You can see now. I apologize for our listeners. This is a visual graph, and I'll break things down for you audibly as best as I can. But you look at where the Steelers are this past year, the Steelers blitzed 25.9% against on passing plays this season. Now, that's not low in the league. That's 12th in the league. But it's also the lowest percentage the Steelers have had in the last 6 years. It's also that they also ranked as low as as low as they've had against the pass in those past 6 years. Now, again, this does not mean that the Steelers defense was bad. The Steelers defense ranked 8th in points allowed, 12th in yards allowed. By all measures, that's actually those are actually some of the better numbers that you have. That's the lowest amount of yards. That's the best ranking in yards allowed per game in the past 4 years. It's the second best ranking in points allowed per game in the last 4 years. So, like, by all means, like, that doesn't mean that the entire defensive plan was bad. But what I think this shows you here, if you look at the blitz percentage, and if you're looking at it on screen, they had 40 sacks on the season. Yes, they had 33 turnovers, which was the most in the league. But when you look at where the Steelers have been as far as getting to the quarterback, this is supposed to be their identity: hitting the quarterback, being physical, dictating the pace of games, being the team that sets the tone, not letting the other team's offense set the tone. And it just didn't do that so many times this season. And I get that the Steelers can win with more bland fronts up front, where TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith, Cam Hayward, they can just kind of rush with 4 guys and they can win a lot. And you need to be able to do that at times, but you also need to be able to be an aggressive team that sends guys after the quarterback, that tries to generate things there. And the Steelers just didn't do that enough this season. We talked about how leading into the playoff game, when the Steelers had even just Patrick Queen blitz 6 or more times in a game, they were 5-1 in those contests. He blitzed only 5 times against the Ravens. And again, that number was less about a magic number that they need Patrick Queen to just blitz 6 times in the game, but it was more about representing when they go on attack more often with their blitzing and saying, hey, we're sending heat, we're going to force you to make a quick decision. And they were on their P's and Q's and coverage behind it. It allowed the Steelers to be the unit on the field that was saying, hey, you're gonna have to make this decision right here. We're gonna force you to have to make this call, and we're gonna try to isolate you into these spots. And that's what the Steelers have done so well against Lamar Jackson for years, was they have isolated him into decisions that are not favorable to him, that don't play to his strengths, and allowed them to be in that position. That's what the Bills did to the Ravens in this playoff game. And that's why I think that this requires a relooking at what the Steelers have been defensively. And again, pulling back up these numbers here, this past year, the Steelers were 25th against the pass. They only had 40 sacks. That's tied for the lowest that they've had, over the past 6 years. Yes, they did get turnovers. And again, I think Teryl Austin, he draws up some good schematics when it comes to things in the secondary, as far as disguising things and creating opportunities for more turnovers and trying to confuse quarterbacks at times. But you also need to couple that with aggressive play. And if you look back at the last 3 years of Keith Butler, yes, 2021, not great. They finished 20th in points allowed, 24th in yards allowed. They were 9th against the pass, but they blitzed 27% of the time. That's the second lowest in that 6-year span. They ranked 13th in the NFL that year. They only got 44 sacks. But if you go back to 2020 and 2019, where they ranked 3rd in yards in points allowed and yards allowed in 2020, and 5th in points allowed and yards allowed in 2019. That's back-to-back top 5 seasons as an NFL defense. Both those years they ranked 3rd against the pass, and both those years they blitzed more often. In fact, in 2020 they blitzed 40.3% of the time, which was the 3rd highest rate in the NFL, 36.9% for 7th most in the NFL in 2019. And in both those years they had over 50 sacks, 56 in 2020, 54 in 2019. Also, they ranked among the best in the NFL in creating turnovers, 27 turnovers for second best in the NFL in 2020, 38 turnovers in 2019. So the most turnovers that they've had in a season in that span. But part of that, I think, goes into the fact that the Steelers in those seasons were getting after it. Now, there were other problems that the Steelers had as well. There were also, I think that was also a really great time personnel wise for the Steelers. A lot of guys were kind of in, I think, a good spot as far as, you had Joe Hayden, Steven Nelson as your corners. That's probably the best cornerback tandem they've had in a few years, in several years, maybe even. Minkah Fitzpatrick was in his prime. Cam Hayward was in his prime. Stephon Tuitt was still with the team in 2019. So, like, there's other things that factor into that as well. But I think that there's things that you could take from those years and apply them back to this team, and that's where the Steelers have to get back to. I want to talk more about how that can be part of their identity moving forward that needs to be a change there, and more about what the Steelers need to do with defensive coordinator and how this defense needs to look more in 2025 as they try to keep revamping things. We'll talk about that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is also brought to you by LinkedIn. Growing your small business in 2025 comes down to how well you can hire. And let's face it, better hires start with smarter insights. That's where LinkedIn comes in. With the strongest hiring data available, LinkedIn helps you identify the right candidates, giving you the confidence to make the best decisions for your business. I've used LinkedIn Jobs myself, and I can tell you it's a game changer when it comes to hiring the right fit. Small businesses are wearing a lot of hats, so every hire is crucial. LinkedIn gets that. That's why they connect you with the best candidates using data you won't find anywhere else. From unique skills and interests to the connections that you share, LinkedIn helps you find the right person for the job. In fact, 72% of all small businesses say LinkedIn has helped them find high-quality candidates. I know from experience that when building your business, you need to find the right teammates who won't drop the ball on you. LinkedIn helps you look over the best candidates available to find that trustworthy playmaker for your business. So hire smarter this year and find your next great hire on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. We're also brought to you by Prize Picks. It's playoff time. If you're like me, you want to make the most of these final weeks of fun NFL football action. That's where Prize Picks comes in. If you have football and you want a chance to win real money watching the games, Prize Picks is the best place for you. It's the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy player projections. With Prize Picks, you can simply pick more or less on player stats projections like total passing yards or rushing touchdowns, and you have a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money. You can make your picks in less than 60 seconds, and whether you're looking for a flex play to boost your payout or want to cash out quickly, Prize Picks has got you covered. They've with over 10 million members and billions in winnings, it's clear that people are loving this platform. And when your picks hit, Prize Picks makes it easy to cash out. You can get your money in as fast as 15 minutes. Here's a special offer for Locked On NFL listeners. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's Prize Picks. Run your game. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 instantly when you play just $5. Prize Picks. Run your game. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue the discussion. We're going to focus on the defense for this one. I've done a lot of talking about the offense and Justin Fields versus Russell Wilson versus Arthur Smith versus this offensive line, and we're going to get to that assuredly this week. But I want to stick with this topic point because, again, as I talked about in the first segment of the show, the Bills sent the heat against Lamar Jackson. They had a good plan to contain him, much like a plan that the Steelers have had in 8 of their last 11 matchups with the Ravens. And it worked for the Bills, and the Steelers, I think, could use that not only just against the Ravens, but in general. And I know that there's times that you have to switch it up, and that's that's where you have to kind of make your best guesstimates as far as when you want to send the heat versus not sending the heat. And this isn't saying that the Steelers should blitz all the time, every time, but working that into becoming more of a staple of the team, I think, especially with the personnel you have right now, could be a game changer in 2025. Again, Patrick Queen, he's a good linebacker when it comes to handling the various roles. Like he's the reason the Steelers went and signed him is because he can cover. And I know that there's some people that say they're going to think back to the playoff loss to the Ravens and think he can't do anything right. Well, there was just the week before he was covering Jamar Chase over the middle, tipped a pass that ended up being intercepted. He's had several good games against all throughout the season, including against the Ravens when he forced a turnover and was a big factor in disrupting Lamar Jackson in the game that they won earlier in the season. And sure, Patrick Queen needs to be better at times. We also can acknowledge he also had the flu in that game. They said he had several IV bags trying to get him fluids before the playoff game. But I think that there's still, you look at him, you look at Landon Roberts, you look at Peyton Wilson, their strengths are being physical, downhill players blitzing the quarterback and sending heat with them. I think that that's something that the Steelers need to get back to being able to do more often. And again, when you look at the blitz rates and the higher blitz rates under Keith Butler in their best years and what they were able to do, I think it creates this opportunity for the Steelers to say, hey, you know what? And I want to shout out my friend Alan Saunders. We have him on the show all the time. We did the Final Word on Channel 11 WPXI last night together. And he said something that I thought was very on point when it came to the Steelers. And he said the Steelers have to be the team that is being aggressive and devise your game plans not around what you're trying to cover up and not around your weaknesses, but around your strengths. And that's something we also said on this very show going into the playoffs against the Ravens. Like on offense, we said, hey, your strength has not been the run game. Your strength has been Russell Wilson hitting George Pickens and Pat Freiermuth and Calvin Austin and getting those guys going. That needed to be the plan for the offense. On the defense, it had been, like I said, blitz, go get after this guy, get your front seven active against them. And I think that they need a defensive plan and defensive leadership that gets that going again. And again, I think that for those again who are going to try to dismiss the idea that a change in defensive coordinator can lead to different types of strategies and different plans that can go into things, look at the differences between year to year between Keith Butler and Teryl Austin. And again, they're pretty obvious when you see the different blitz packages and what the Steelers were able to offer. You go back to it again. The last year of Keith Butler wasn't exactly all that great. I think that's part of why he retired, and that was kind of that. But the 2 years before that, when they were sending heat, that's a big part of the I think what made those Steelers teams really good, especially those defenses really good that propped them up. 2019, of course, that was the Devlin Hodges year where they needed the defense to be truly elite if they ever were going to get to 8-8. They did that. 2020, the defense as well as the offense did put up some points early in the season. It was the defense that won several games, especially down the stretch. And I think that that's where the Steelers have to be able to be that kind of a team moving forward. I also think that as far as personnel wise, that's what you need to be looking at if you want to be that kind of team. I think they have the linebackers on the team for the future. I think that they have some of the pieces for the future. I don't think that they should trade Minkah Fitzpatrick unless they're getting good compensation for him. I do think that he's still part of the equation, which you want on the back end, because he can still be in the right spots. I think that Joey Porter Jr. is part of that picture. I think Cam Hayward is part of that picture. Keanu Benton, TJ Watt, Alex Heisman, Nick Herbig. They got all those pieces, but they could use some fine tuning. One thing that the Eagles did, and we'll talk about the Eagles in the next segment because we'll go over all the different games and what I thought of the past weekend. But one thing the Eagles did, they added 2 cornerbacks that are early in this last draft class that have proven very useful to them, Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. And they teamed up with Darius Slay, and now their secondary, they can rely on those guys to live on islands, to be aggressive. If you lose, you go out on your shield. But you're going out playing your style. You're going out being aggressive and saying, hey, if we're going out, it's because you beat us when we were trying to do what we wanted to do, because that's what we think we're good at. Not because we tried to do something to mask it up because we were worried that you were going to beat us with this. We wanted to be the aggressors that said, hey, our style of play is going to be what wins this game when we're playing at our best. That's what the Steelers need to get to doing. And I think that one thing that what happens with the secondary is you saw, especially down the stretch there, breakdowns in the secondary, miscommunications. And oftentimes when you can't line up man-to-man, that's when you resort to zone because you can't trust your guys to win consistently. And I think that sort of happened down the stretch. Dante Jackson, early in the year, I thought had some really good things. He had his back injury that kind of limited him for a bit. And I don't think he got back to the level of play that he had early in the season. Cam Sutton, we discussed for months, was not the move. He wasn't that guy. And even Beanie Bishop, who I think had a great rookie season for an undrafted player. I think that the Steelers, he's a nice, a hardworking young piece, and that I think the Steelers need to make it a priority to get 2 cover guys or even 3 cover guys to add to the secondary who they can trust to win in press, sticky man coverage. I mean, draft high and sign high at cornerback. Find guys that can play in the slot, find a guy to play outside, and an extra sort of utility defensive back who can be feisty in those packages. And they don't have to be completely elite, but they have to be more than solid, if you get what I'm saying there. And I think Joey Porter Jr. can be part of that future. But if you have that, that's when you can be more aggressive with your blitzes, because you're trusting your secondary to hold up behind you. When you're setting the heat, you need your secondary. They're not going to be able to run with guys all the time, all throughout the game, while a quarterback sits back in the pocket for 6 or 7 seconds. But if you're sending heat and you're sending heat in smart ways and you're devising up the different looks up front to confuse the offensive line and the quarterback about where the heat's coming from, how it's going to get there and get in the right attack angles in the backfield, that's when the quarterback only has 2, 3, 4 seconds at best to make a decision or to run and try to outrun your pass rush. And then when that happens, you're in chase mode. You got to bring the guy down, and then you're trusting your athletes that you've invested in up front, which I think are still very good for the Steelers, to be the fact that wins. And if the back end is just holding up in the early parts of that play, that can be enough for the Steelers to play that style of football. And again, it's about being aggressive. It's about being back into the Blitzburg mentality that I think defined some of the best years of the defense. Again, it's not a cure-all. You don't just blitz all the time and everything's fixed, because I think that was one thing that, like, for example, when Tom Brady went up against the Steelers, he loved it when they blitzed. You know why? Because he was very good at identifying where it came from. And he was able to say, okay, they're doing this, they're doing that. Let's counter it this way. And so oftentimes you beat Tom Brady how? With 4-man rushes that contained him, and closed down on the pocket, didn't make it easy for him, and then you had complex coverages behind them. That's often how you beat Tom Brady. Sometimes the blitz would catch him off guard, but more times than not against the Steelers, he was prepared for that. I think that this is a sign that in 2025, if the Steelers are going to be a better defense than they were in 2024, it's going to require being more aggressive. It's going to require being a unit that gets after the quarterback more, plays to the strengths of having a TJ Watt. TJ Watt talked about how he's open to moving around in the defense. Okay, great. Now get a coach that's going to help devise that kind of plan in the defense to get him more looks in different spots, confuse offenses about where he's lining up so they can't isolate him as well as much as they did, especially down the stretch for the Steelers there. That's got to be a key for next year. And again, look, if you're sitting there at home and you're wondering about that chart that I was talking about, and you're listening to this audibly and you're not watching this on YouTube, just check out the YouTube page for the chart that I'm posting, that I'm showing here, because I'm telling you, like, if you see the differences in the blitz rates and when the Steelers are doing, you kind of get the message that I'm hammering home here. And for those watching on YouTube, thanks for putting up with me putting that chart up the whole time. But I really do think that if you're the Steelers, like Alan said, you got to play to your strengths. And this team right now, its strengths are, it has some pretty good pass rushers. It has some guys who are really good at pinching down and winning at the line of scrimmage, but you need to let them go on attack. And you also need to reinvest in some places. That's why I've been saying all along, all season, when people said, oh, they should draft a wide receiver in the first round, maybe if that's the value of who's there. But I think that this team could really use a new interior defensive lineman. It's going to be a young presence with Keanu Benton. They can learn with Benton and Hayward for the next few years. And if he's an early round pick and he's an immediate dog and who contributes, great. They also need cornerback help, and not just cornerback on the outside to pair with Joey Porter Jr., but also slot cornerback, and a good slot cornerback, not someone that you're picking up off a scrap heap and hoping works out. I think they need guys who can be sticky in coverage, who can work with that, and that way you can trust your whole secondary when it's healthy to be able to say, hey, we're letting you guys live and work on islands a whole lot, but the rest of the defense, they're sending heat. We're having all these different complex looks. We're being aggressive up front, causing chaos, making problems for offenses, and forcing the quarterbacks into decisions that we can try to dictate that they don't, where they go. That way they don't get the matchups they want. You get the matchups you want on defense more often. We'll break that down more as we get throughout the offseason and we start talking about more of these things. And we'll also talk more about who some of those targets should be, because I've only slightly begun even looking at the draft process as far as a lot of the players that are out there. I have like vague ideas of some guys that I think they should go after. We also don't know who's even going to be in free agency. A kind reminder to everyone out there, free agency changes all the time leading up to March. So because of the players who get cut, players that are available to be trade, blah, 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 all that, you get my point. There's still a long way to get there. But again, I think it's not just going to be personnel that needs to change for the Steelers defense in 2025 if they want to be better. It's also going to involve the plan. And that's why I'm not so sure that Teryl Austin is the guy, unless you hire someone else that comes in and says, hey, Teryl Austin, you keep up what you're doing on the back end. Because again, I think the plan in the secondary is in general fine. They need better help to execute it. As I pointed out in a film study on Rashad Bateman's touchdown, you can go back and look at it when the Steelers gave that up. It was the first touchdown they allowed in the game. They had it drawn up where they had it one of their slot cornerback drop back into deep coverage and be the help guy for Dante Jackson against Rashad Bateman. The problem is that slot cornerback was Cam Sutton, and he just was too slow to get to get to his spot. But they had the play drawn up there. I think Teryl Austin needs somebody who's going to help him draw up things up front to create more things there. That's something the Steelers need to get done in 2025. We'll talk more about that as the week goes on, but I want to give more reactions to what we saw across the board in the NFL as far as what set up the conference championships. We'll do that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, to remind you, this show is also brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win on your first $5 bet. That's $300 in bonus bets for just betting $5. FanDuel app gives you everything that you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. The conference championship round is set. The Eagles are 5.5-point favorites at home over the Commanders, and the Chiefs are 1.5-point favorites over the Bills as well. The Chiefs are home. Where will you put your money? Be sure to do so with FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. You could start the season with a big return on FanDuel today. Remember, new customers, go to FanDuel.com to join today. When you go to FanDuel.com, you can grab your $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet of $5 or more on FanDuel Sportsbook. Again, $300 in bonus bets for winning just your first $5 bet only on FanDuel. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Back here in the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We talked a lot about the defense. Let's talk about the playoffs this weekend. Give me your thoughts in the YouTube comment section, or tweet at me at Carter Critiques if you'd like, about your thoughts on how the playoffs worked out in the divisional round. We can all kind of just acknowledge the Chiefs were going to beat the Texans. They were the better team. I was impressed by how the Texans kept it close for a good bit, and it took the Chiefs getting in the fourth quarter and kind of closing that game out. But the Chiefs, they're the better team. There's a reason they're the 1 seed. We've seen it all year long. I'm very intrigued to see how they match up in the AFC playoffs. But I thought the first game that really kicked it off, that everyone was like, oh, snap, these playoffs are crazy, was the Commanders' upset over the Lions. And I did not have that. I thought that Jaden Daniels was good, but I thought this Lions team was a team of destiny, even with all their injuries, even with their struggles. I thought, like, hey, they're going to figure it out. This offense is really good. This defense is going to be good enough. But, man, Jaden Daniels went ballistic in this game. 22 of 31, 299 passing yards, 2 touchdowns to no interceptions. Also added 51 yards on the ground. That dude's ridiculous, and he is the straw that stirs the Commanders' drink there. I was thoroughly impressed by that. I thought that the Lions defense would perform better than it did. Jared Goff, 3 interceptions in that game. Tough one there. I think that they could have run the ball more, but maybe that was also the pace of scoring throughout the game. The Commanders did score quite a bit early. They were up 17-14, 24-14 in the second quarter at one point. They went into halftime up 10. So maybe that was the difference there, was that they had a double-digit lead going into halftime, and then eventually got a 45-28 lead over the Lions. Maybe that's part of the problem, but I thought certainly the Lions, they had been a more balanced offense for the whole season, and Jameer Gibbs got 105 yards, but on 14 carries, I think they could have tried to get him the ball a bit more. But again, Jaden Daniels, very impressed with that guy as a rookie quarterback. He is he's playing. He's not just being a passenger who's making on a good team that's making big plays. He is being a leader on the field. He's making smart decisions. He's not being fazed by any big moments. I'll be really interested to see how he plays against the Eagles, who won their game against the Rams. I did think that the Eagles were going to win this game, but as I said on last week's Friday show, I had to pick the Rams to give myself a chance against against Jenna, and I lost that one. So Jenna's now our picks champion on the show this year. That sucks, but I did think going into the game, if I was picking purely on who I actually thought was going to win, there was a reason I picked the Eagles to win this game. Now, I will say the Rams deserve a ton of credit for coming in and fighting, and I thought they would. They were my dark horse, as I said earlier in the show. I thought that early in the season, I thought that the Rams were picking up steam at late, and I was like, man, that team can catch somebody napping, and they caught the Vikings napping in the first week of the playoffs. But going up against the Eagles or the Lions, I thought the Rams were going to be in trouble. The Eagles very much are the bullies that we keep talking about. When we talk about bully ball in the NFL, we talk about what the Steelers want to be like. The Eagles are that team. Jalen Hurts didn't really have that good of a day. 15 of 20, 128 passing yards, 0 touchdowns, but 0 interceptions. But he ran the ball well, 70 yards overall, had a 44-yard touchdown run. But the key player of the game, of course, was Saquon Barkley, 26 carries for 205 rushing yards. That guy's ridiculous. Alan Saunders told me he voted for Saquon Barkley for MVP, and it's tough to argue with him when he makes big plays like that. But that's what Saquon Barkley did, and that's what this offensive line for the Eagles did, and that's what the Steelers are trying to get to be. They want to be this team that can impose their will on you with the right kind of offensive line that creates holes, that gives running backs spaces to make big plays. And again, on the back end, their sticky secondary, Darius Slay making plays. Quinyon Mitchell, who got hurt in this game, I think that was unfortunate, and that could be very costly for them in the NFC Championship game against a good passing team. But Cooper DeJean in that mix. Zach Bond's also been really good for the Eagles. I thought that was really solid play from them across the board. But you got to tip your hat to the Rams for the fight that they gave. Matt Stafford, a 97.2 passer rating, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, 324 yards to the air. Also, Kyren Williams getting 106 yards on this Eagles defense. The Rams did not come and get punked out. They just fell short in the end to a really good team. But that brings us to the game that everybody was watching this weekend, and Steelers fans in particular were very focused on this game because of who was playing, and of course the Ravens, who lost 25-27 to the Bills. And man, I shout out to the people who pulled it up right away and were posting these clips on Twitter and everything. But just seeing the Ravens and Lamar Jackson throwing a pass to Mark Andrews that gets dropped on a 2-point conversion that could tie the game or send the game into overtime, that was just, man, that had to be painful for Ravens fans, man. That was tough. And listen, I think that there's mistakes that Lamar Jackson made in this game. The first interception, can't have it. He fumbled the ball early, but man, did he get his team back in this game with some amazing plays, just dodging pressure, making good reads, making good throws. Heck, the drive that he had at the end of the game, they got the ball back with 3 minutes and 29 seconds, and they walked down the field and scored on an 88-yard touchdown drive. They just Mark Andrews dropped the pass. He also fumbled in the fourth quarter. I think Mark Andrews, that was a really rough day for him in this one. But Lamar Jackson put up a good fight. Josh Allen didn't really have to do as much in this game. This was a game where I think that the Bills just up and down. They held their own. They made big plays. They were the kind of the Steelers. They took the kind of Steelers blueprint. You don't allow the Ravens to make big plays a whole bunch. You create turnovers. They won the turnover battle 3-0. And you hold it down, and you don't commit turnovers yourself. Josh Allen, 16 of 22 for 127. He didn't slice things up. And that's not to say Josh Allen wasn't good in this game, because he was. He also rushed for 2 touchdowns. But I think I was really impressed by how the Bills were able to isolate up the Ravens. You'll kind of get them out of it. I do think that John Harbaugh maybe leaned away from Derrick Henry a little too much later in the game. Only 16 carries for 84 yards. I thought that they should have kept feeding him at one point, especially when they went for 2-point conversions and missed them. And I don't think Derrick Henry got a single touch on either of those. And if they just kicked those 2 extra points, they also probably send this to overtime. But looking at what the Ravens like to do, and knowing that they were missing Zay Flowers, the Bills came with the right plan. They attacked, and they trusted their quarterback to make enough plays while not turning the ball over, and their defense stuck to it. And that was they deserve kudos for that, because they played that very well. And I think it's gonna be very interesting to see if the Bills can do a similar thing to the Chiefs, who have just had their number in the playoffs over the years. It feels like it's got to be this year for the Bills, right? Because of how many times they've fallen short to the Chiefs. I think it's 4 times in the playoffs they've lost to the Chiefs now. It would be devastating for it to be 5. But I think that this is going to be a very fun AFC championship matchup. But as far as where the Steelers fit in all these, and again, trying to, whenever I look at these and the Steelers aren't in these rounds of the playoffs, I look at which teams that you're saying, like, hey, who can the Steelers play like in the future? What can the Steelers emulate from some of these teams into their future plans? And I look at the Bills kind of taking a lot of the scripts that the Steelers have already put up against the Ravens. That's something the Steelers need to reincorporate into their plans, for future matchups with the Ravens. And again, it's not as easy as just, copy and paste, because the Bills also went up against the Ravens earlier this season and got shellacked by them. And I think that sometimes home field plays a certain advantage. Both in the Ravens Steelers series this year, the 2 games in Baltimore, Ravens won. Game in Pittsburgh, Steelers won. For the Bills, game in Buffalo, Bills won. Game in Baltimore, Ravens won. I think that does play a factor there. But at the same time, there's acknowledging that that it's not just about home field. They had some good game plans as well to kind of try that up. And I think it's going to be interesting to see something there. But another thing that I thought was really interesting about the Bills game was it wasn't just Josh Allen making crazy plays, which is what I think some people will lead you to believe. That Bills offensive line kicked a lot of butt too. They opened up some holes for their run game. And this was a Ravens defense that I think that had been great against stopping the run. They'd been great at winning the line of scrimmage throughout the season, as the Steelers saw when they played them. And the Bills offensive line was able to, they didn't statistically take away everything. As far as what the Bills are trying to do, the Ravens didn't do that. But defensively, the Ravens were the number 1 rushing defense in the NFL. And so they're gonna bring it. James Cook had averaged 3.9 yards per carry, but so many times they got the rushing yards they needed. Johnson, averaged 6.2. Davis had 7.3, and Josh Allen, whereas he only averaged 2 yards per carry, he got 2 touchdowns. And they were able to run the ball when they needed to close out the game and to extend their lead. So I think that this Bills team, there's still things to learn from them outside of just having a really good quarterback, which is what some people will lead you to believe that's all that you need. But this Steelers team, they need to invest more in their offensive line to fix things there. And I'm not talking about a high draft pick at this point, but I do think that guard play needs to be better next year, whether it's Mason McCormick or Isaac Seumalo, or finding someone else to replace one of those guys or both of those guys so that they get more consistent play. I think Mason McCormick can grow, and I don't think he's the answer. I don't think he's the problem, but I do think Isaac Seumalo needs to show that either A, he was injured this year and that, because he did suffer an early season injury and that lingered, or B, they need to go find someone who can fill the shoes at left guard a bit better and be a veteran for what's going to be a very young offensive line in 2025 with Broderick Jones, Zach Frazier, Mason McCormick, and of course Troy Fautanu, who will be back in the mix. But we'll have a lot more time to talk about that. We'll see if there are coaching changes that are made this week. If the Steelers make those public, we'll keep you updated with that here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, all the social medias at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday, breaking down your Pittsburgh Steelers. Back tomorrow with more on your Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.